The Rant podcast is brought to you by CubsInsider.com. Welcome to The Rant. Welcome to The Rant podcast, everybody. Today is Saturday, February 8th, 2025. I'm John Perlease. I'm here with Evan Altman and Jacob Zanola. How you doing, guys?
Wonderful.
Solid.
How about you?
Yeah.
I'm good. Spring training. I'm in Phoenix. I'm like 15 minutes away from the Cubs spring training facility here in Mesa, Arizona. And I'm getting pretty amped. Pitchers and catchers tomorrow.
Yeah, it's super goofy that like baseball is starting before football ends. I don't like that. I mean, I like that baseball is back, but like I want the separation of church and state here, like a more specific. Although hey, the Waste Management Open is going on down there too, so I guess might as well throw it all together and just get crazy.
It's just you've got the snowbirds, you've got the people coming down for spring training. Although like the games for spring training don't start for a little while now, like a couple more weeks, I think. And so we, you don't have like the spring breakers and stuff like that quite yet, but you've got the snowbirds, and typically snowbirds are older people. And so they're the people who like, go like in a 65 mile an hour zone. They go like 55 in the left-hand lane.
and they get off the plane really slow. That's my least favorite thing about going to like Phoenix or Fort Lauderdale or Tampa, any places, because it's just the plane is like half filled with old people who have flown before but have forgotten or do not understand how to conduct themselves on a plane, or maybe are just physically incapable. So I'm like, I really do my best. If I get on Southwest or something, I'm flying there, I will gladly pay the extra money to get up as far as I can in the boarding process so that I can like get, and there are a couple times where I've gotten just right in the front. So I'm just grabbing my stuff and I'm gone before the wheelchair brigade comes out, because otherwise I'm going to be on the plane for like another hour and a half. So anyway, I'm looking forward to that. We'll see.
It's a bit of a workout too, because if you're in the middle, you're helping everybody get their bags down. You're doing the thing, which is fine. I got no problem helping people, but it is a little less work when you're up towards the front. You can just bolt right off the airplane.
Yeah, I think I've made it obvious that I don't want to help anybody. I have zero altruism, right? I don't want to be around people. I don't want to help people. I want to get in the front. I don't even like the aisle, but a lot of times I'll take if I can get the front row aisle, gladly, I will take that because I usually pack pretty light. I'm just grabbing. Yep, I'm grabbing my backpack out the top, and I'm gone. Like it's just, I'm like a ghost, man. So
you're in front of the people in first class.
I mean, it's Southwest.
You just jump in front of all of them.
They don't have first class on Southwest. Come on.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, that's we're all single class in that one. Which actually
all united on Southwest.
Yeah, but actually, I'm flying American out there, so I'll have to sit behind some cool people.
I think I'm Frontier on my way, so I did not get first class. I was not paying that.
And you're coming out, Jacob. So you guys are both coming out. You're coming out at different times. You're both staying with me, as far as I know. And so it's a bummer that we're not all going to be here at the same time, but it will be fun. Like March is just a fun time for me in general, particularly when I'm not employed, which I'm not gainfully employed right now. And so, I am looking forward to spring training because it's going to be fun. But Jacob, you're coming out, the first weekend, right?
The first week of March. I'm the first weekend of March. I'm out there for 2 games.
And then Evan, you're, I think, a couple weeks into it.
I think it's the last weekend of spring training, right? It's the 21st through the 25th, because then shortly afterward, they'll open the season. And down there, and that was I was kind of leaning back and forth, but I figure it's easier. It's over my kid's spring break, and I was going to try to bring my son down. Then I realized he has to get his wisdom teeth out the Monday that I'm out there. So I was like, I don't think he would be very well able to get out, but eventually we'll get that figured. Got him out there one time. He really enjoyed it. And he and I went to, opening day in Arlington last year, and that was a lot of fun. So, I mean, hopefully he'll be busy with his own baseball and it won't matter. So still got some time.
Cool. Well, we've got just jump into some of the things that we want to talk about here. And I think that the first thing that's on the top of the list is this Alex Bregman thing. I haven't checked recently. I don't think he's signed with anyone yet. The status for people who maybe don't know is a lot of rumors around where Alex Bregman signs. And it kind of feels like rumors are coming from, a number of different, whether it's the Tigers or whether it's the Blue Jays or whether it's the Astros or whether it's the Cubs. There's kind of rumors around all the teams. And there's the Cubs have reportedly made a 4-year, $100+ million offer to Bregman. The Astros have reportedly made a 6-year, I think $156+ million offer to him, which apparently wasn't good enough. And it just feels like it's kind of dragging out to me. It feels like if the Cubs were going to sign him, this is my take, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. But if the Cubs were going to sign Bregman, I think it would have happened already, and I think he is waiting for that longer term deal. I don't think the Cubs are going to improve their offer all that much, if any at all, with the exception of maybe adding some player options, opt-outs. And so to me, it feels like him signing with the Cubs is really unlikely, and I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
Have at it, Jacob.
Okay, well, the 4-year deal is, that's where they're at as far as I know. They're still sitting strong at that 4 years, around $120 million offer. From what I was told, there's opt-outs after all 3 years there, at least 2, but I believe there was an opt-out after the first year, which I kind of hate a lot. But it's clear that he wants a creative deal. Every report coming out is the Cubs are trying to be creative. I'm going to disagree with you on if he was a Cub, he would have already signed. I think that's what it is with the Astros. I think if you wanted to go back to the Astros, they upped their offer yesterday, and it still wasn't good enough. The report of the offer isn't out there yet, but we know that they upped their offer, and he still said, no, this isn't good enough. I mean, it just feels like it's Cubs, Tigers. I don't feel like the Blue Jays are too likely just because no one wants to play in Toronto. Plus, they're going to extend Vlad. I think it's pretty clear that they'll come to an agreement eventually on an extension, or it seems trending that way. They won't have enough money unless they defer his whole contract, which they did with Santander, to be fair. But I just have my doubts about him wanting to go to Toronto in the first place. So I'm really thinking it's down to Cubs, Tigers, maybe the Astros if Crane gets really pushy in the last, the end of the negotiations. But I'm sort of 50-50 on where he lands right now.
Well, the I'm sorry, the Blue Jays, I just want to point this out, just signed Max Scherzer, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't know if that changes the Blue Jays.
I don't think that does. Well, just like, there were a couple people that were like, oh, the Tigers signed Jack Flaherty. That takes him out on Bregman. I was like, I don't know how that calculus works, because the Flaherty deal was certainly heavily front loaded, but obviously that balances out. But it's also like, I don't know why signing an aging starting pitcher would take you out of the market on one of the top third basemen, one of the top free agents in general.
Well,
but
the Tigers are at one, right? That's why I do understand what they're saying about, okay, are they out? The Tigers, because they haven't been this high payroll wise in a solid 7-8 years. So adding Flaherty, you wonder how much farther that ownership's going to let them push the budget.
Although in that division, they should. Well, of course, I say that, and then we look at the Cubs. Even when they aren't spending much, the Cubs are outspending everyone in the division and not doing anything with it. And before I forget that, I do want to point out that over the last 4 seasons, the Cubs have led the division for 36 days, and the Pirates, who don't spend anything and haven't signed a multi-year contract with a free agent in 10 years, have led the division for 46 days. So the Pirates have actually been more successful within the division than the Cubs over the last 4 years. Beside that, if we get back to Bregman, it is obvious to everyone that, like, so Scott Boras has lost his fastball, right? Scott Boras is like Kevin Costner's character in For the Love of the Game, when he's just like gritting out that last bit to try to get through that last game, get the perfecto, whatever. Like, Boras is doing whatever he can because he has got to save some face with this dude. He's getting everybody to try to jump. He's doing everything he can to feed this stuff, put the word out there. We just saw him, and I literally just saw him. I talked with him on Tuesday, randomly, right? It's not Scott Boras and I don't talk regularly, but he was down there and they got the deal done with Pete Alonso. But boy, does it! Maybe it'll be different if I really dig into it, but it feels to me like they just whiffed badly with Alonso. It's like dude was up there hacking and ended up having to like look over and see the third baseman pulled way over and had to bunt down the line just to get a hit. Like I think he got his lunch eaten on that one. And it certainly does not look like, and Jacob, I think you had maybe tweeted something out about this. And I was like, yeah, that sounds exactly right. It's like, the Cubs have a creative offer out there. There are other offers out there. The issue is that not only are the Cubs not close to what Bregman is seeking, but nobody else is either. Right. I think at the end of the day, like it's what's obvious about it, regardless of who's in, out, or whatever, that nobody has stepped forward with a big enough offer that he's willing to take. And I think, we heard about this early that Boras went into it, as we've seen with many of his clients, with incredibly unrealistic expectations for what he was going to be able to get. And I think the bar got set so high that a lot of teams just didn't even bother. Right. And it's coming up a little bit more now because we're seeing it's clearly coming down. So it feels again like this is one of those situations. We've seen this with Hoyer before. It's kind of come out and it's like, we're just going to sit back and wait. Like, here's what we got. Here's our offer. And I think it would be very unwise to stretch anywhere close to what Bregman actually wants, because doing so is going to leave them paying out a bunch of money. And like you said, if we're talking about a 1-year opt-out, I won't get too much into that on the broader scape, but it's in order to get him, I think Jed Hoyer is going to paint himself into a corner as far as like this 1 year, this lone year. And it concerns me to no end what could happen if they do that. Consider that if they sign Bregman, they end up maybe trading Horner, which seems very likely in that case. And then they're not able to extend anybody and they get an opt-out from Bregman. Well, now you could, conceivably losing Tucker, Bregman. You've lost Horner in a trade. There's a bunch of other guys on 1-year deal. Like I do not, I like pushing in to a certain point. I don't like doing it when everything is hinging on 1 year, after which you're going to have to reload in a monster way all over again. So that scares me a little.
It's Hoyer's last year of his contract. And he even said, and I believed him, yeah, but I want what's best for the future of this team. I didn't think he would operate any differently. He's been operating differently. I mean, that Tucker move is like something we have not seen him do before. I did want to mention the Ari Alexander. He works in Houston and covers the Astros there. He mentioned, did you guys see the candy analogy that he used yesterday? I know I shared that. I wasn't sure if that came across your guys' feed.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah, with like Snickers and Kit Kats or something like that. About if I offer you this,
burst,
you want these? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first off, it was genius and it made me very hungry. But I think it's a good point of how he said there are all of these teams these few teams, probably Cubs, Tigers, and Astros, that are interested. But even when they're saying, hey, here, we'll give you 10 starbursts, the Astros upped our offer. They still don't want him. At what point does he need to settle and be like, hey, 10 starbursts is better than none? Or does he need to look at the other offers? But those offers could easily come off the table. The Cubs are already looking at pivot options for if Bregman is not a realistic solution. If the Cubs say, yeah, he wants 5 years, he's not budging, we're out, they can easily bow out and go sign someone like Nick Pivetta. Like, there's many other options that they can go to. Bregman is, like you said, Evan, you put that perfectly. Boras fumbled the bag, pun intended, horribly with Alonso. I mean, just one of the worst negotiations that we've ever seen. And he's trying to get that all back with Bregman. And all the teams are like, no, we're good. At what point does Bregman step in and be like, dude, I want to play somewhere. I'm not going to be sitting out, the first 2 months of the season. It's just getting ridiculous. And like I said, the Cubs are already looking at other options. At what point, I'm curious what you guys think. Is it smart to just go to those other options? Because I don't want the team focusing on, okay, but who's our starting third baseman when we're 2 months into March or 2 weeks into March?
Yeah. I mean, I go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I just, Evan, to your point, like this is where I'm afraid of the whole situation is that you sign Bregman on a 4-year deal with opt-outs after each year, and you have to trade away Nico. One thing I did see someone mention on Twitter, I think, or X or whatever you want to call it, is instead of trading Nico, trading like Tyon, which I'm not completely against. I actually think trading Nico in a situation where you get Bregman on a deal where he's probably going to opt out after a year unless he gets injured, like it just, I hate that. I just hate that. And unless you're getting something from the, I mean, if you're getting Dylan Cease back for Nico, then
which is sure as hell not happening.
Yeah. but yeah, I mean, so it's like,
not just for Horner, straight up. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be some minor league guys thrown in there, but and so it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. And in a situation like that, then you're like, all right, well, but then you still have to get rid of a pitcher, right? You still have one too many pitchers, and so it's just it's hard for me to make sense of like bringing Bregman on and trading Nico. I just, especially unless Bregman's a 4-year deal and he doesn't have any opt-outs, which is
not going to happen. Right. And then the other issue again, and I'm running into this, right? So the Cubs have historically been very much opposed to signing guys who had qualifying offers, right? Particularly when they just, again, they screwed up, bad accounting. As much as Jed wanted to try to whitewash that and be like, we knew we were going over when we signed Bellinger. I'm like, you guys only went over by a couple million. Like, that's super dumb to do that and only win 83 games. And of the myriad ways you could have avoided it, like you can't tell me you didn't screw that up. But they lose $1 million out of their IFA pool. They lose their second and fifth picks. It's one thing if you're doing that for a guy who is going to be on your team for the next 5 or 6 years, and that overall that production that he's going to provide to you is worth more than what you would expect to get over that same period from your second and fifth round picks, or second and fifth picks in the draft, not necessarily round, right? If that dude's only there for a year, that's an exceedingly high cost to pay, in addition to the $30 million AAV that's going to bump you up, in addition to possibly, your Gold Glove starting second baseman who's basically penciled in for 4 WAR every year. There's the opportunity cost gets so high if you're talking about the gamble. And the thing is, like, if Bregman did sign such a deal that's only for 4 years, whatever, damn well he wants to get that opt-out so he can hit the market again. What we saw with Cody Bellinger was he ended up being hurt, not playing nearly as well, and he opted back in, despite the fact that I think it actually would have been in his best interest overall, although he ended up with the team that he needed to be. But the Cubs hosed themselves on that one. Like, I don't think that deal worked out very well for them at all. So I don't like how this, as much as, and I'm going to stop rambling because there's another Bregman point that I want to make. The way this deal would have to work out and the fallout from it. And when we talk about, to use yet again Jed's phrase of threading the needle, I feel like you're doing it to such an end that you could cut off your nose to spite your face, and that this would all have to work out so well. But the problem is that if everything works out well for the Cubs as a team because of what these guys do, they're all gone. You're not extending them, and some of them are opting out. I mean, maybe there is an extension there, but like, that's my problem with it. Is that Jacob, as you mentioned, Hoyer has already shown us a couple things that go against his kind of traditional MO. And it's like, you can't just have the pendulum swing all the way from being too conservative to the other of being far too aggressive. And then you've cost yourself all these assets you built up for a 1-year run at it, when you have to face a team like the Dodgers, if you do that have clearly done a much better job on both fronts when it comes to spending and developing. So I'm like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of knee-jerk stuff going on, and if things work out really well, if all this comes back and Bregman's got to stick his tail between his legs and come crawling in at an offer that is more club friendly, great. But I am very concerned with how the whole fallout could look beyond this. Hey, for 1 year, cool. I think it could look really good. But for what? What if you go out there, you win 90 games, you get bounced in the first round of the playoffs, and you see 3 of these dudes leave to free agency, let alone the other guys whose contracts are running out, who have been on the team and who you're going to have to replace. So I'm struggling to look at the calculus and see how this ends up working out in the Cubs' favor beyond 2025.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that opt-out after the first year. That's the big thing, that give him 4 years, but I don't want the opt-out after the first year. I want him here for 2 years guaranteed. And then I'm okay with you paying him all that money. But like you said, I'm not paying the qualifying offer plus all that money, plus losing Nico. Even if you get a good player back for Nico, which I think they would, I don't care if I'm only getting Bregman for 1 year. Like, that's 60-something million worth of value that I'm losing.
Yeah. And to the other, because I want to hit this before I forget it. It was, and this got a lot of play on social media if you saw it, but what's the dude's name? Hembo or whatever. The guy from ESPN who was like talking to Buster Olney on the Baseball Tonight podcast and being Chicago's the worst place in the world. I'd never let Bregman go there. How is he going to hit doubles? It's bad for doubles. I'm like, so you cherry picked the hell out of this one stat that said Wrigley is it has terrible park factor for right-handed hitters hitting doubles. Well, numbnuts. The reason for that is because the power alleys are so comfy that right-handed hitters are hitting. If you overlay Bregman's hit chart, and this is the thing, because the way, and then people look at expected home runs, be like, well, it's not expected hit, but that's only calculating the home runs he hit. It's not looking at all of his batted balls and saying how many home runs would he have hit. It's how many of his home runs would still be that in other parks. And then this ding dong is saying, oh, he needs to hit 40 doubles. He can never do that at Wrigley. It's like, yeah, because he could hit 40 home runs there because the balls he hits are so highly concentrated. He is a gap hitter, right? Like that left center field gap is custom built for him. So he would actually, and there to my point of that first year opt out and how likely that would be is that just like we've talked about with other guys, like Bellinger makes so much sense for the Yankees because of the short porch there in New York. Isaac Paredes makes way more sense in Houston than he did in Chicago because the Crawford boxes, and he is a dead pull hitter that we knew wasn't going to hit well at Wrigley. Everybody knew that except for Jed Hoyer, and maybe Jed did know that and then still just flipped it and parlayed it in a good way. I think that made sense, but I really think Bregman in Chicago would be a phenomenal fit. But again, as we've hammered home far too much now, I'm just, the nail's already in there, but it would be to his advantage, and I think so much so that it makes an opt-out that much more likely. But it's just, it bothers me to no end when people just have intellectually dishonest commentary about stuff like this and saying the Cubs are the worst place you could go because you looked at one stat and removed all relevant context to it, and you did so on a large enough platform that people are going to look at and freak out about. And then, I wrote about it, but I'm going to go ahead and say that Baseball Tonight has a little bit more traction than I do in a larger platform. But I would just hope, again, that this guy's, well, if you go to Baseball Savant and do this, I'm like, well, or you could go to Baseball Savant to his actual page and look at some of those relevant statistics and realize that what you said was completely asinine. That stuff just bothers me. Again, the intellectual dishonesty of it, whatever. Like, yeah, I personally don't like the idea of adding Bregman, and I think I've made that far too abundantly clear at this point. But I think we should at least look at it and say, yeah, he could still be really, really good for the Cubs. It's not that I don't like him being on the team. It's like I don't like so many other potential ripple effects. But yeah, I just had to get that off my chest, and I'll shut up for a while.
Well, and to add to that, though, and where we talk about the qualifying offer, and we talk about this being Jed Hoyer's last year, it's like typically the Cubs aren't in on a QO guy, right? And that's where it seems even more strange where you're like Jacob talking about Jed acting differently. I think the fact that the Cubs are pursuing Bregman, a guy that's got a QO attached to him, in and of itself is unlike Jed would do. And so then to your point again, if you get this 1 year and you've got like all these guys who are going to leave at the end of this year, and then by the way, you're not getting a second round and a fifth round pick in 2025. I mean, like, what do the 2025 Cubs look like in that situation? Right? I mean, it's kind of frightening.
It's frightening, and it's all budget wise, because if it wasn't budget wise, what would be fantastic is to keep them, is to keep Nico and sign Bregman, because then you can just have Shaw play super utility. He can play third, short, second, and he can DH. He can get in the lineup at least 5 times a week. But we can't go over the luxury tax, which I get. They're trying to reset that because they messed up last year. It was pathetic budgeting, whatever. We also signed Colin Ray for $5 million, and that may be the most useless and confusing signing of baseball history. Like, that signing has no merit whatsoever. And we're looking back at it, and all of these different chat boards and people I'm talking with, they're all like, what were they thinking? Like, what's the point of that? And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to be this much over the tax. Hey, remember, we spent $5 million American dollars on Colin Ray. Like, there's no reason. And there's these little contracts here or there that were kind of pointless. Sure, they're depth, but then you'd be like, oh, we wouldn't have to trade Nico. Tyone, you would probably have to throw in a prospect if you really want to trade him, if you really did want to trade him. So then it's like, okay, what are we doing there? What are we getting back? Is that just a pure salary dump? Because it probably would be. And that's the second salary dump of the winter. But if you don't get Bregman, we still have $28-ish million left before the tax, which is around what Bellinger was getting. So that means it was a pure salary dump, which they said it wasn't. They said they were going to reallocate the money. They haven't. Are we really going to acquire $28 million worth of contracts in trades in season? No, that's ridiculous. So they've really boxed themselves into a corner of what they've told us, what they haven't told everybody, and what's logical in the money sense.
Yeah, it was somebody tried to mansplain to me how the Bellinger money actually has been reallocated, and they like listed all these dudes. I'm like, you don't get to go through and name everyone they signed. Some of them.
Like, no, it hasn't. No, it has not.
Created. Yeah, no, it definitely hasn't. And I was like, okay. And that was one of them where I'm getting better at just like moving on, right? Like I'm not going to engage in that. It's like, no, like, and back to the candy analogy. The other thing is like, okay, well, I've got, let's say I've got 5 Snickers bars, right? And I trade those to you. And then I go out and I get like, I don't know, 20 fun-sized Milky Ways or whatever. Like, sure, I've got 20 now instead of 5, but they're all tiny. That's not even as much as what I had. So, like, you could spend the money. Theoretically, you go sign 28 guys for $1 million a piece, but they're not going to be any good, right? Like, you want to go get 25 Connor Joes? You know what I mean? And like, you could be like the Padres. And that's what they did. They just signed Connor Joe and freaking Jason Hayward to platoon in left field, which is whatever. But yeah, to the point of like Colin Ray, what? Huh? Like, I don't want him being the 6th starter. I don't even care. Like, why is he going to be a middle relief guy? Why would you do that? Why not just bring anybody up? Birdsell, again, assuming Ben Brown is healthy and Wicks and all these guys, like, how many other dudes are already there making a 5th as much with better stuff that you can just keep in there without allocating a whole new roster spot to a guy who used to be there? I don't get that stuff at all. Another dude who doesn't throw hard. And I'm just like, that bothers me. It bothers me across the board. But yeah, I mean, again, I think we knew they were never going to reallocate all that Bellinger money, because I think not only do they need to stay under, and we may have even discussed this. I've talked about it, written about it. I don't think the budget allows them. I would be shocked if the budget allotted to Jed Hoyer gets them within $10 million of the CBT. I think they need to make that. And like, I'm talking after acquisitions. I think they want to stay so far under it that they can't screw it up. And I think there's, we also have to differentiate between the competitive balance tax, which is not actually the budget. The budget itself is really how much in actual payroll they're going to allocate, right? And then there's another factor about how much in AAV, and that's where Hoyer's got to work the figures to get it there. But, I would say, I don't even know what they're at actual. Let me just click on the page. But I do think that, so they're at 191, so I mean, maybe they'll be allowed to get a little bit higher. But if they're at about 191 million in actual payroll right now, and Bregman would be, let's say, $30 million in actual money, right? That puts them at what, 221? And I would say that they're probably at 215 to 220 is where I would say, and then last year they were 228. So I would say, let's say 218. Let's kind of split it. Say they got to be 10 million less than last year. I would say that's probably where Ricketts is at. He's probably 220 is like his cap of what he's willing to spend in actual payroll dollars this year. And I think that's severely hamstringing them when it comes to making this final little push to round out the roster.
I don't feel bad about where the roster is without Bregman, though. I have to be honest. Like I'm good. Like I think this team can win like 88 to 90 games.
I'm good, but then you also just have that money sitting on the sideline that you're like, okay, but why didn't we improve the roster even more? Why didn't we get over that hump? From the math that I did the other day, I think they have around 27 million to spend before the first luxury tax. So like Evan said, let's say that they don't go up, that they're 10 million under. That gives us about 18 million left to spend. It would just be frustrating. Bregman puts us over 90 wins. Bregman makes us, dare I say, one of the top, I don't want to say top 3 teams, but one of the best teams in the National League, I think, with Bregman. Signing Alex Bregman is a true, we are going to compete with our creative and personalized resources with people like the Dodgers, like the Mets, they scare me because of last year. They went on a surprise run. But other than Juan Soto, I don't know how much they really scare me in that division. But this team is good. Like you said, John, it's just, why are we sitting at, say, 88 wins, like you said, with 25 million that we could have spent? Why not spend 25 million and get us up to that 90 wins?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, that's not going to be resolved today, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see where it comes out and if the Cubs end up signing Bregman or not. But to transition into a different topic that's obviously related, I am wondering, like, just generally speaking, like, what your guys' opinion is in terms of like next season and what we think the Cubs this season, I should say, what we think the Cubs. Tell me top three things that you'll be paying attention to this spring training that are going to make or break the Cubs this year.
Oh, that's a good question.
Man. Well, I knew about this question ahead of time, and I still didn't do a very good job of kind of like filing this stuff. I mean, I think a lot of it is obviously going to come down to that starting rotation. How healthy can these guys be? Because barring a big addition, right? Dylan Cease, who at this point, I know Michael King was out there, but I think, the Padres look at that and say, well, King might sign an extension. Cease will not. Cease is most likely to be traded. I don't think he is likely, but he's the most likely between the two of them. And it sounds like there's a report out of San Diego today that Robert Suarez, the closer, is the most likely of the three. But again, it's a sliding scale on actual likelihood. So, I look at this and I see a rotation that isn't entirely dynamic, but that has a very, very high floor. I think the ceiling is limited, depending on what they get. And can you get Cade Horton into the bullpen somehow or into a swing role a little bit? So he looks like he's healthy. Are these guys going to is Tyon going to kind of repeat as far as his strong performance from last year relative to the year prior? That part worries me. Matt Boyd, can he stay healthy? Right. None of these guys are such. Imanaga is like really about the only one. You can't really look up and down that rotation and be like, oh yeah, I'm counting on these guys all to give 150 innings. Easy. It's like, no, that'd be kind of a shock if multiple of them went the full season without getting hurt. So I think that to me is the big one. That is my concern. The other concern is just for the middle infield in general. Both Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner underwent offseason surgery. Should be back to full health. I think Swanson before Horner, but should play most of the season. But there again, we saw how inconsistent Swanson was. He played well kind of down the second half, but really, really looked bad for a while. And Horner was hampered by that injury for so long. So can those guys bounce back? Can they do it? And then my next concern, I'm not concerned at all for the outfield. The outfield, I'm like, okay, that's one of the top outfields in the game right now. But then I look at the corners, and again, barring any other changes, does Michael Busch continue his climb? Can he show a little bit more power? Can he continue playing defensively at a Gold Glove level? And then at this point, we're assuming that Matt Shaw is a starting third baseman. I've got all the faith in the world in him, but he's still a rookie. So you've got really young corner infielders, experience-wise, who are going to need to bear a lot of the offensive load. And that is not something as much faith as I have long-term. The short term of that is a little bit difficult. So again, so I guess it's like kind of the whole infield, but starting rotation, middle infield health, and then corner infield experience and production.
I like what you said about the rotation. I'm not 100% convinced the rotation's done, but at that point, like, I don't want Assad in the rotation. I don't want Wicks worries me, but Assad I definitely don't want in the rotation. I'd be curious in a minute to hear your guys' thoughts on signing Nick Pivetta. But I would say, like you said, rotation health. Seiya Suzuki has gotten injured. I believe that last 2 years he's gotten injured in spring training or quite early into the year. So I'm watching for his health. Evan or John, am I correct on that? It's been in spring training the last 2 years, right?
He had that oblique issue really early. He's been hurt like multiple times in general, right? He's had like the dislocated finger. He's had the oblique issue. There was another little thing in there. So like either way, he definitely, hopefully keeping him out of right field, maybe fixes some of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say his health. And then, like you said, just the health's a big thing on this team right now. When we talk about starters, relievers, and then Nico and Dansby, as you mentioned. But yeah, Seiya Suzuki, the starters, and then I wonder where some prospects could fit in. That's probably the other thing I'll be paying attention to is there's always some prospects that break out during spring training, whether it's a fluke breakout or whether it's, hey, you're good enough, we're going to give you a spot on this team, because I'm not 100% convinced the bench is rounded out yet. I'm curious if a top prospect may fill in there or not. Someone like Kevin Alcantara, he was up at the end of last year. Will we see him get some playing time? Owen Casey get some playing time? Where would they rather them all start in Iowa and wait for the inevitable injury to occur?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, right? Is if you're looking at spring training, it's health of your rotation, coming out of spring training, and then, it feels like all the position players are locked, and so it doesn't feel like if you've got a guy that is developing and hasn't gotten a lot of play in the majors yet, you really don't want him sitting on your bench. And barring a trade of somebody without somebody else, like in a situation where Horner gets traded, that's only happening because you've got Bregman, right? And so it doesn't really open up a spot. I almost would rather see Shaw at second base. I'm concerned about Shaw. I know he can play third base, but I'm concerned about whether he can play third base at the major league level. And if he has trouble adjusting. What's that?
Based on who they've played at third base over the last few seasons, hell, I could almost go out there and
it's not going to get worse, but we need somebody who's got a glove.
Oh yeah, no, I think
saying,
he's a good enough athlete. He's a hard enough worker, and he's got, I think, the skill set. I don't think third base will be a problem for him.
And if it's not, if he turns out to be a stellar third baseman, then hey, I'm psyched. Then we're good, right?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting what you said about the position players being locked in, because you're right. Barring Alex Bregman signing, which would then lead to the Nico Horner trade, we already know who's going to be starting. So it's just praying that no injuries come upon that offense in the next month of baseball.
And so coming into the season, you're probably feeling pretty good about, like, really at the end of the day, number one is like injuries, right? Like coming out of spring training, we just want to make sure we're healthy. We know someone's going to get injured. It happens every year. And then the good thing is you've got some depth there in the minor league guys. And so it's, if you get a position player that's injured, then, you can probably swap somebody in fairly easily, with the exception, maybe third base. Because like what happens, let's say the Cubs don't get Bregman and something happens and Nico gets injured or something and Shaw has to shift over to second. Who are you bringing up to third?
Ooh, probably a
Gage
Workman in 30. Yeah.
I don't like that at all. I don't like either. I don't like that a bit.
And that's where trading for Bregman actually makes sense, right? Because it's like you've got really no without Bregman. But if you get Bregman, you do have some depth because you've got him and you've got Shaw. However, second base is a lot easier to fill in terms of positioning than third base.
You could also have Bush play third if you need.
I don't know.
I feel like that would be like all those options.
That's ideal, though, is it?
Yeah, no, that's far from it. There's a reason he's playing over at first, but again, what we're talking about with all these things is more of a fallback, right? Like that's in right. The event, and then we go to that. Then yeah, if you get to that point, but there again, the chain being as strong as its weakest link, or whatever we want to look at, or it's the exhaust valve in the Death Star. Everything else is great. And then there's just one tiny little thing that got built into it engineering wise that if you exploit it, the whole thing blows up. Like it would truly be awful to have them establish all this stuff and then have this one weak spot that, man, if this doesn't work like exactly as planned, then it all falls. Now, again, is there actually depth there? Could we end up seeing, like this wild performance from John Birdie where it's like, okay, well, Matt Shaw breaks his hand and can't play, and John Birdie steps in and puts up a 5-WAR season at third base. Like, is that likely? Of course not. But that would be, Jedward would be sitting up there in his office being like, see, I told you, outperforming expectations. You knew it was coming. So that would be one that I would have a lot of fun writing about, that Jed like planned the whole thing. But no, I third base is definitely a concern.
Let me ask a different question. Does Owen Casey get to Chicago? Does Owen Casey start the season in Chicago? Because
no,
I think you don't think he does.
I don't know how he could. There's not a place for him to play at all. Like, they're not going to call him up to Chicago just to sit on the bench. You don't have a spot in the outfield and say Suzuki's a DH. So, I don't think that would make any sense at all. I mean,
you're probably going to get an injury in the outfield.
I think it would take like
is it Canario coming up?
Yeah, I think it'd have to be a couple of injuries for that to happen.
So you think Canario is ahead of Casey?
No, but I think Canario is someone who they don't mind if he's only used on a temporary. Like I feel like they've been trying to get rid of him for a couple. Well, they wanted to trade him before he got hurt real bad a couple years ago, but
yeah.
He's more of, I think, that guy who they wouldn't mind because he's had some experience. If they did just have to bring him up as a fill-in or a bench bat, they could do that with him because I don't truly believe they're concerned about developing him further. They'd rather do that with Alcantara and Casey. But I don't think that that's a situation, especially with the swing and miss that Casey brings. I don't know that having him come up and try to play a role immediately out of the gate would be in their best interest unless he just absolutely tears it up in spring training and kind of forces their hand in that regard.
I have Casey as probably one of the most likely prospects to be traded at the deadline if it does come to that. I would say he's up there as somebody that, he'll probably see some time in Chicago after, like we've talked about, the inevitable injury. But I don't know if I would say he's on this roster or on this 40-man by the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that's where the Cubs have the most to trade from is in the outfield, right? And whether you're acquiring another infielder or some infield depth or a pitcher, that would make the most sense is getting rid of some of that outfield kind of redundancy.
Yeah, and Casey has definitely slipped in terms of how evaluators are kind of looking, which is it's interesting that it's happening now because he did actually improve in a few of the areas. I mentioned he does have some swing and miss, but he's picked that up a little bit. He has shown that he's not a complete butcher in the outfield. A lot of people were concerned that he'd basically be almost a DH only, but it's interesting to see just as things have kind of come along, as this has evolved, and the fact that he's the only player left from the Yu Darvish and Victory Carrot trade from a few years back. Like, of all the guys the Cubs got, he's the only one that's left, and that might not even be the case for much longer, right? So it's like he looked untouchable for a while, and now it's kind of like, it seems like the Cubs have gotten a little more lukewarm on him. So yeah, I think he's a very likely trade chip at this point, but I guess we'll see. But I think that's certainly something. Again, the outfield depth is where they've got plenty. But we got to look a couple years down the road.
Yeah.
That changes significantly, right? Because Tucker might only be a year, and Suzuki and Happ only have a couple years. So it's like this isn't like a deal where they're all locked up for 5 or 6 more years. They're going to need some outfielders in the very near future.
I knew you were going to say that. Okay, let's switch gears one more time. Biggest obstacle to 90 wins. Jacob, you go first.
I want to say injuries, but we've already said that so many times.
Do you think we're locked in at 90 wins, barring injuries?
No, I worry about the offense having a down stretch like last year, where it on paper should have been a quite solid offense, and then the bottom just fell out from under them. So I worry about the lows and how, because the highs can be high, but how low will the lows be? And if they're too low, I mean, that team just got in a rut and couldn't win a game for 2 months, and that ended up killing them. Otherwise, they would have been a very good team. So I would say I'm worried about the offense and how often they can get themselves out of those ruts.
Okay. Evan?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to get around the injuries being so obvious. I'm trying to go somewhere. I will say this, while I have praised the outfield, if Kyle Tucker is not Kyle Tucker, right, in terms of, we see it's, this happens with some guys. Sometimes a contract year really brings out the best in someone. Sometimes a change of scenery really works well. Other times it doesn't. You get somebody who's pressing, somebody who's trying to force something to happen versus letting it happen. And if Kyle Tucker does not have a career year, right? I mean, we saw it with Bellinger last year, right? Like, he had this great season, then he comes back and he has this opportunity, and he was just kind of like, meh. So, like, if we see something out of Kyle Tucker, like we saw from Cody Bellinger last year, which is good and not great, then all of a sudden this lineup looks not nearly as good. If Kyle Tucker is like top 5 offensive performer, like he has been for his career, which is still wild to me. Like, he's like the most under the radar dude who's out there for being as good as he is. But if he does not put up,
he's been surrounded by some pretty damn good players, though.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Right. He's been surrounded by an insane squad. Yeah,
for sure. And
when you've got to pitch to the guy,
yeah. But if he, and that's the other thing that gets me, is like, when has Kyle Tucker ever dealt with any kind of a fishbowl type media and fan presence and hype ever as a professional? Like, that dude was super unheralded the entire time he was in Houston, playing in Chicago, with the expectations, with the talk about an extension or what kind of money he's looking for, with all this going through. he seems like a really down to earth dude who can handle that, but like I don't know him. And even if I did, that doesn't mean that I know how he's going to handle that pressure. So I think how he's able to step up literally and figuratively to the plate is going to determine a lot about what the Cubs do and how well they perform throughout the regular season and whether they can make noise in the playoffs.
Okay, fair. I think for me, I am most concerned about the Cubs starting pitching. They just don't have the power arm. They don't have, they've got, I mean, to me, Steele and Imanaga are twos, or number two guys, right? They're not number one guys. They don't have a number one. They don't have a true number one. And that concerns me.
Imanaga was as number one as you can get last year.
I don't know if he's going to be able to repeat that though.
That's
valid. He doesn't have the stuff that makes you feel like he's going to come out and dominate.
He doesn't have the velocity, but his fastball was one of the best pitches we saw all season.
But it's not overpowering.
No, it's not.
And he's not going to pull a Kyle Hendricks, right? Like he doesn't have that. Or maybe he does. Maybe I'm off with that.
Well, I think the concern for him, if I may, is that we saw how Wrigley played historically poorly in terms of park factor and knocked down a whole lot. So I think the concern there is like he could do everything exactly the same, but if the wind is blowing out 50% more than it was last year, all of a sudden things change dramatically in terms of his results, really to no fault of his own. Right. And so it's like, that's completely out of your hands. Like you could make a great pitch that last year turned into a fly ball short of the warning track and under different conditions could be 5 rows deep in the bleachers, So I think with him being a fly ball pitcher, my concern for him is just that there is a lot of environmental influence that can kind of go into that could either work out really, really well in his favor or really poorly. So that could definitely be a factor.
Yeah.
Well,
but I do feel like go ahead, Jacob.
I was gonna say, I love how you mentioned the weather. I may, if it's not too late, switch that's a great answer for what could hold this Cubs team back is how will Wrigley play this year? That report you were talking about with Buster on like Baseball Tonight and saying there's no reason Bregman should go to Wrigley is they're acting like Wrigley Field is the worst hitter's park of all time and has been that for the last 500 years. Like right. They are acting as if that is just, you are not getting a hit. Like it's the Polo Grounds extreme. You're not getting a hit. You'd be lucky to get on base. It's not that. It just had a really bad year, but the media and the narratives and, they get paid to talk. They have to make something up. It's just everybody's so extreme about how bad of a park it was. It was a really bad park, but what if it's not next year? And then you juggle, okay, but was our pitching that good because of the park or were they just that good? So that may not be something holding them back, but that's going to be something that could tip the scales a little bit.
Yeah, but that could also work in their favor too, right? Offensively.
Right. Yes.
Which you would hope so. I mean, I think that the Cubs don't have like crazy power, but they definitely have more power than they had last year.
Easily, yeah.
Particularly with the addition of Tucker, like hoping he can get there. I mean, I think that's where adding Bregman really becomes more compelling. Is that you then have multiple 20+ home run guys that you can pretty easily rely on, and that feels pretty good, especially at a park like Wrigley. Especially if the wind's blowing out, which we know it will, even though it didn't last year as much. But I think I feel better about the offense for the Cubs for sure than last year. I think Bellinger's an upgrade Tucker is an upgrade on Bellinger. I think Bellinger had one good year in 2023, and it wasn't good enough. And everybody was like, yeah, but your batted ball numbers still aren't good. And then he couldn't sign anywhere else. And then he stayed with the Cubs and his numbers got kind of like more in line with what you would have expected in 2023 anyways. And I guess you could say it'll be interesting to see what Bellinger does this year. but
yeah,
I don't think
he's gonna rake. He's gonna kill it.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure.
Well, he's in New York, right? Yeah. I mean,
No, he's just gonna kill it. You mentioned 20 home run hitters going around the diamond. I mean, Tucker, as long as there's no injuries and they play to what they should. Tucker, yes. PCA, no, probably not. But I would say, I mean,
he'll be in the teens. He'll be close to 20.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Hap, yes. Shaw, based on everything that we've heard from prospect guys, they said, yes, this is a 20 home run hitter. Cool. Dansby, yes, he got 16 last year, but I think he would get 20. Nico, not a chance. No, thank you. Yeah. Bush, yes. And then catcher, who knows? They're going to be running everybody out there because they still don't know what they're doing catching wise. But yeah, I mean, that's a really
Amaya's got the potential.
Squad. Yeah, I would say yes, especially with them splitting time. I'm having him around 8 to 10 home runs. But then if you had Bregman, you're having 7 of the 9 hitters? And then DH Suzuki. Yes, Suzuki's hitting 20 home runs. Oh, yeah. So you have 7 of the 9 in your lineup. If you get Bregman and take out Nico are hitting home runs. We've missed that. Like we haven't had a 40 plus home run guy in what feels like 85 years.
It's been a minute.
Well,
right. But yeah. I do want to point out. So when the prior to 2023, and when I was looking at this, and I just throwing it out there as an I told you so, and I looked at Bellinger's numbers, and I was one of them screaming the loudest about like, man, I don't let you know. But it's just 2-strike approach. That's what's causing that. I'm like, look, dude, unless he takes every at bat to 2 strikes, that's not telling the whole story of it. But his batted ball numbers were crap, and I was concerned about what that would entail. And that's why I was like, but let's look over here. And Bellinger was coming off a very good year, though, right? So let's look at this other gentleman by the name of Matt Chapman, whose offensive numbers didn't look so good, but the underlying data was tremendous. And I just want to look at how those two things worked out, right? And I will, and maybe Chapman falls apart and he sucks, but like, dude did okay for himself, right? That was another one though, where Scott Boras fumbles the bag, and Chapman picked it up and ran with it and made the most of it. Was able to get that extension, but I think that's, and we got to be careful, right? Because I talked about cherry picking stats earlier and whatever, but I think when we're evaluating some of these guys, and we can look at, right, you got to look at a whole picture, but there's a lot that we can see sometimes when there's good luck, bad luck, things like that. But yeah, I mean, continuing the primary point here is I like the balance that in theory, when we look up and down this lineup, you've got some dudes with a ton of speed. That's one thing Shaw doesn't get much credit for, but like he's a really strong athlete, right? They've got some good base runners. Even John Birdie, like that's an area in which he's done pretty well, as I recall. And so there is good balance up there. You got guys who can steal bases, get the extra base. That's an area where the Cubs did a really poor job, and we see kind of the changes, and they've changed some of their base running or their base coaches and things like that too. But there's going first to third on singles and then scoring from second on doubles were not in their strong suit. And so if you can get more of that, stealing extra bases, and not actually in terms of a stolen base, but getting that extra base, stretching to get more guys in scoring position, and then actually successfully doing it and having a third base coach who knows what the capabilities are of the players that he's sending or holding, I think could, this is not a team that's getting blown out every game or that's blowing people out every game. And if you look back at the difference between 83 wins and 90 wins, could be something like 10 or 11 runs over the course of a season. And that's like 10 or 11 runs is nothing in 162 games. But
and yet it is, and yet it's everything.
Right. And that's the thing is like how many times could an extra run have eliminated, right? It gives you a 2-run lead instead of a 1-run, or a 1-run lead instead of a tie game. And now all of a sudden that blown save doesn't happen, right? Because you didn't get shot down at home.
Right. We need a third base coach that won't send Nick Madrigal and think that he can outrun Ellie De La Cruz's arm.
Oh my God.
I was at that game and we were speechless. It was just, and then I remember Willie Harris drove out on his scooter after the game and someone yelled at him, "What were you thinking?" And he ignored him. But I was like, I'd like to hear that answer. Like, what was the thought process there?
Yeah, he was not good. It'll definitely go ahead.
I was gonna say I did look. So Schwarber had 38 home runs in 2019. Who is, and Bleed Cubby Blue actually just wrote about this a day ago, according to my Google search. Who was the last Cub to hit 40 home runs in a season?
Dude,
I don't know. Yeah, that's a very good question.
I was not born yet. I was not born the last time the Cubs had a 40 home run hitter.
I'm thinking 90s.
I mean, it can't be Sosa.
It was not Sammy Sosa.
I don't think it was Sammy Sosa. I think it was the guy the Cubs got from the Yankees. What was his name? Was it Derek Lee?
It was Derek Lee in 2005.
But Derek Lee, they got from the Marlins.
Yeah, no, that's not who I was thinking.
Clint Frazier?
That was back in the 90s.
Derek Lee.
Yeah. It was Jackson Frazier. Yeah, Derek Lee, 46 in 2005. Since then, nobody.
That is like you almost have to try to you know what I mean? Like, how is that? Wow. Okay. Yikes. Dude.
Yeah, I was.
I was
not born
that,
yet.
huh?
I have not seen a 40 home run hitter on the Cubs in my lifetime.
Well, hopefully it happens this year.
I mean,
that would be amazing.
It should.
It would be amazing,
right? Like Kyle Tucker, it's there
That's
for
what
him.
You should do. Yeah,
it is. I mean, it felt like Bush was going to get there last year. Remember, didn't Bush have like
5 in a row?
Yeah, he was off to like just an insane start, and then it just.
Tucker was on pace for 46 last year.
Okay. There you go. Again, it'll depend on who's kind of like batting around him and how protected he really is and whether that makes a difference, but I think it will. But it'll definitely be interesting to see. So, I mean, a lot going on here. Obviously, a lot of unknowns going into Jed Hoyer's final year. Spring training, the things we know, spring training, pitchers and catchers report tomorrow, the 14th. What is that, like Thursday or something like that? Is the first full workout?
I believe so, yeah.
And then the first game is, hold on, I'm going to pull it up real quick. I want to say it's like the 20. It's early this year, and it's like the 20th, yeah, at Camelback Ranch against the Dodgers. And then the first game, they keep making spring training earlier and earlier. Like it used to never start in February.
Well, it's because Tucker, or it's because of Tokyo now.
Well, but last year was early too. And then of course the season starts early. They've got the 2 games in Japan, and then they come back for a few games in Mesa, and then they kick off the season with a 4-game set against the Diamondbacks. So
I just find it exceedingly odd that they have to go start the regular season in Japan and then come back and they have more spring training.
I know, it's so weird.
You start the season like why not just build in like a few days before and after, have them start out there and then whatever, come back to Arizona and then start to like, what's the point even of having additional spring games after
the Dodgers and Padres did that last year. Dodgers and Padres had that after their games weird. Over, and
this is true. And the Dodgers won the World Series, so maybe that's foreshadowing.
Hey. Yeah, except the Dodgers are playing in this one too. So
I was gonna say I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, if you're gonna give me between the 2 teams that are playing in the Tokyo series and one of them's gonna win the World Series, I'm gonna go ahead and bet very heavily on the Dodgers.
Yes.
Hard to not say that, but well, I guess we'll find out. A lot of stuff we're gonna find out, and we'll great having the podcast with you guys this week. We'll circle back again. I think our cadence right now is once every 2 weeks. I could see that increasing at some point and becoming like a weekly thing. But for now, we'll just keep it once every 2 weeks unless something crazy happens and we need to like hop on an emergency podcast. So what do you guys think about that?
Sounds like good.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Any parting words of wisdom, guys?
Wouldn't mind a Bregman signing by the next time we record.
Bregman signing.
That could be fun.
Tomorrow, right? It's tomorrow or bust.
That would be fantastic.
I mean,
I wonder if it is. I mean, at what point? I don't mean to start another whole conversation here, but at what point do you just say, we don't want to deal with this anymore. We don't want to miss out on other options.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's, hey, report date. Like, we got to know what our team is, one way or the other, right? If
it's
I'm
like
Jed
Bregman's
Hoyer,
that
I got to know.
Bregman's that girl who keeps flirting with you, but then like won't go out with you.
Yeah.
And you like kind of feel like she likes you.
Yeah, they wouldn't talk to me, or they wouldn't talk to me or go out with me. So, you know, in that regard, I'm like the Pirates or something, you know.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time on The Rant.